The air in the small apartment often felt thick, even with the window slightly ajar, letting in the humid Bakjong air. For Elara, it wasn't the humidity that weighed her down, but an invisible pressure that had been building for weeks. She was 38, a kindergarten teacher with a gentle smile and eyes that usually held a spark of warmth, now shadowed with a growing unease. Her life with her husband, Ben, a software engineer with a quiet demeanor, had always been predictable, comfortable. They had built a life filled with simple joys. Weekend trips to the countryside, evenings spent reading side by side on their worn sofa, the comforting rhythm of their daily routines. There were no dramatic highs or lows, just a steady, reliable current. Or so she had thought. It began subtly, a flicker of the unusual in the mundane. A notification on her old smartphone, a message request from a profile she didn't recognize. Usually, she ignored these, assuming they were spam or misplaced connections. But the profile picture was oddly compelling. A grainy, black and white photograph of a young woman with striking eyes and a familiar curve to her lips. It wasn't Elara, not exactly, but the resemblance was uncanny, like looking at a faded version of herself from a past she couldn't quite grasp. Intrigued, a feeling she couldn't quite explain pulling her in, she clicked on the message. The message was simple, unnervingly so. "I thought you'd want to see these." Attached were several more photographs. Each one was old, the paper yellowed, the edges softened with time. And each one featured the same young woman from the profile picture in various poses in what looked like different locations. Some were candid shots, laughing with friends, sitting alone by a lake, her face turned towards the sun. Others were more formal portraits, the woman staring directly into the lens with an intensity that both captivated and unsettled Elara. The truly disturbing part? The woman in the photographs bore an undeniable resemblance to Elara, a resemblance that went beyond mere coincidence. It was in the shape of her eyes, the set of her jaw, even a small, barely visible mole beneath her left eye, a mole Elara herself had. But the clothes, the hairstyles, the very quality of the photographs screamed a time long past, a time before Elara was even born. A chill snaked down her spine despite the muggy air. She showed the pictures to Ben that evening, expecting him to dismiss them as a strange prank, a case of mistaken identity. Ben, usually so calm and logical, frowned, his brow furrowed in confusion. He agreed the resemblance was striking, almost eerie, but couldn't offer any explanation. They spent the evening scrolling through the photos, zooming in on details, trying to find some logical reason for the connection, but found none. The sender's profile offered no clues, no name, no mutual friends, no identifying information whatsoever. It was a ghost in the digital world, reaching out with fragments of a forgotten past. Over the next few days, more messages arrived, each containing more photographs. Some showed the woman pregnant, her hand resting protectively on a growing belly. Others depicted her holding a newborn baby, her face radiating a mixture of exhaustion and fierce love. The baby, too, held a faint familiarity, a hint of features Elara had seen in old family photos, though she couldn't place exactly where. The locations in the photos were unfamiliar, glimpses of a life lived in a different era. Yet the woman at the center of it all felt strangely, unsettlingly close. Elara found herself increasingly preoccupied, the images flashing in her mind at odd moments, while teaching her young students the alphabet, while preparing dinner, while lying in bed next to Ben in the quiet darkness. Sleep offered little respite, her dreams filled with hazy black and white figures and the echo of a life she had never lived. She tried to rationalize it, to find a logical explanation. Could it be a distant relative? A bizarre case of someone finding old family photos and mistaking her for a long-lost ancestor? But the sheer volume of the photographs, the intimate glimpses into the woman's life, felt too personal, too deliberate for a random error. The unsettling nature of the photographs began to seep into her daily life. She found herself looking at old family albums with a newfound intensity, searching for a connection, a hint of this mysterious woman. She asked her parents, her aunts and uncles, about any relatives who might resemble her, any stories of lost family members from generations past. They listened patiently, their faces etched with concern as they witnessed her growing distress. But no one could offer any answers, any explanation for the ghostly images that had invaded her life. The silence from the anonymous sender was almost as unnerving as the messages themselves. After the initial flurry of photographs, the contact ceased, leaving Elara suspended in a state of anxious uncertainty. Who was this person? Why had they sent these pictures? What connection did this woman from the past have to her? The questions swirled in her mind, unanswered, leaving a gnawing feeling of unease that refused to dissipate. The comfortable predictability of her life had been shattered, replaced by a disquieting mystery that seemed to reach across the boundaries of time itself. The stranger's act, seemingly random, had opened a door to a past Elara never knew existed, a past that felt strangely intertwined with her present, threatening to unravel the very fabric of her identity. And as the days turned into weeks, the silence from the other end felt less like an end and more like the pregnant pause before something even more unsettling was revealed. The silence after the flurry of messages was even more terrifying. Elara felt as if she was being watched, not by a specific person, but by the past itself. The old photographs haunted her mind, causing her to constantly compare them to her own life. She began to notice strange coincidences, small details she had never paid attention to before. A faint scar on the left wrist of the woman in the photo was identical to a scar Elara had from a childhood fall. A silver necklace with a snowflake pendant, which she had always worn since her mother gave it to her, appeared in one of the photos, sparkling on the mysterious woman's neck. The more she looked, the more horrified Elara became. These photos didn't just contain her likeness. They also contained her marks, items intrinsically linked to her life. This obsession began to affect Elara and her relationship with Ben. She became distant, distracted, and found herself unconsciously checking her phone, half hoping and half fearing a new message. Ben, initially sympathetic, grew increasingly frustrated. "What are you looking for, Elara?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "You're looking for answers to these ridiculous old photos. You're losing yourself." His words were a splash of cold water, but they also startled her. Was she letting this obsession consume her? She tried to reassure Ben and herself that she would put the photos away and return to her normal life. But it wasn't easy. One evening, while cleaning out the storage room, Ben accidentally found an old, dusty wooden box tucked away at the bottom of a closet. It belonged to Elara's mother, who had passed away a few years earlier. Inside the box were old mementos, love letters, and a faded cassette tape. Ben knew how much Elara missed her mother and hoped she would find some peace in these memories. He brought the box out, hoping it would help her forget the strange occurrences. Elara opened the box, her eyes welling up as she touched the familiar items. Then she saw the cassette tape, curious about its contents. She didn't have a tape player, but her old friend, David, did. Elara decided to visit David to ask for his help. David, a history teacher, always had a fondness for old objects and the mysteries of the past. He was happy to help her. When the cassette tape was played, a familiar voice filled the room. It was her mother's voice, telling stories about her younger days. She spoke of her adventures, her old friends, and her fondest memories. As Elara listened with a heart full of love and nostalgia, another voice suddenly cut in, the voice of a young woman. This voice carried fear, muffled sobs, and then broken, incomprehensible words. "We can't go on. He knows everything about us. The little girl won't be safe." The tape ended with a desperate scream, followed by silence. Elara and David stared at each other in shock. That wasn't her mother's voice. That voice was the voice of the woman in the photos, the woman who looked exactly like her. Fear flooded Elara's mind. The voice on the tape, the cryptic words, and the desperate scream. They all connected to the woman in the photos. This was no longer a prank or a strange coincidence. This was a terrible secret, a tragedy from the past that was somehow connecting to her present life. Elara's suspicion no longer stopped at the photos. She began to suspect her own mother, about the secrets she had kept, about the stories she had never told. Did her mother know who the woman in the photos was? And why had she kept such a mysterious tape? Elara's life was completely turned upside down. She no longer felt safe in her own home, no longer trusted the things she once believed. The suspicion spread, seeping into her relationship with Ben. She couldn't explain to him what she was feeling, that her whole world was slowly crumbling. She couldn't stop thinking about the woman in the photos, about the tragedy she must have endured. Like a nightmare, she gradually realized that her life wasn't her own, but part of a larger story, a story full of pain and mystery. She knew she had to continue searching, to uncover the truth, no matter how terrifying that truth might be. Because the woman in the photos, the woman who looked exactly like her, may have died, but her secret was still alive. And that secret was calling Elara's name. The cassette tape lay motionless on the table, a small, harmless object carrying the immense weight of a buried tragedy. The final scream of the woman on the tape still echoed in Elara's ears, a sound of ultimate desperation and fear. She looked at David, his eyes also filled with confusion. He couldn't understand. He couldn't feel the pain and betrayal that were tearing Elara apart. She had spent her whole life building a family, a life based on love and trust. But now it had all crumbled. The photos and the tape were undeniable proof. Her life was a lie. Her greatest suspicion was directed at her father. Her beloved mother was gone, leaving him as the only person who could explain these mysteries. When Elara returned home, Ben was waiting. He looked at her with concern, but his worry couldn't reach Elara at that moment. She just wanted to be alone. She went straight to her father's study, where he was sitting quietly, reading a book. Her father, a gentle, quiet man, seemed to have aged so much in the past few days. She knew he had seen the change in her, the disappearance of the light in her eyes. Elara didn't beat around the bush. She placed the old photos and the cassette tape on the table, facing him. "Dad, do you know this woman?" Her voice trembled, but was filled with resolve. Her father was silent. He looked at the photos, at the tape, and then at Elara. His eyes held an ocean of sadness and regret. He couldn't deny it any longer. The wall of defense he had built for 38 years suddenly collapsed. He began to speak, his voice a whisper, broken, as if searching through each painful memory. The woman in the photo was no stranger. She was his biological sister, Elara's aunt, named Eleanor. He told her about Eleanor's secret relationship with a married man, a man who was wealthy and powerful. The relationship was strongly opposed by their family. They were a traditional family, and honor was the most important thing. But Eleanor had defied everyone, defying the opposition and prohibition, and had become pregnant. Their family did everything to hide the secret, to avoid scandal. When Elara was born, they had concocted a perfect plan. They took Eleanor to a distant place and told everyone that Elara was the biological child of her parents, who were actually Eleanor's brother and sister-in-law. Elara's mother, who had been unable to have children after a painful miscarriage, had agreed to the plan. She loved Elara unconditionally, treating her as her own flesh and blood. That cassette tape was a testament to Eleanor's desperation, her final plea for help before she was taken away. The little girl won't be safe. It was Eleanor's warning to Elara's adoptive mother, who was holding the baby in her arms. She and her husband had agreed to hide the truth to ensure Elara's safety, but also because she desperately wanted a child. In the end, Eleanor left, and no one had heard from her since. Her father's words were like continuous blows to Elara's heart. She was not the child of the mother she had loved, the mother who had died with this secret in her heart. She was the child of a woman who had been abandoned by her family, a woman who had disappeared. She had lived in a world built on a monstrous lie. The pain and indignation choked her. But the story wasn't over. As Elara was trying to process that devastating information, another truth was revealed, one even more horrifying. Her father, his voice shaking, continued to speak. That man, the married man, who caused all of this, he is Ben's father. Her father's words hit her like a lightning bolt. Elara's whole world collapsed. No way. It couldn't be true. Ben, her husband, the man she had loved and trusted, was the son of the man who had ruined Eleanor's life, who had indirectly caused the disappearance of her birth mother. This was no longer just a family secret. It was a tragedy that cruelly and hatefully linked two families. She ran, tears streaming down her face. She rushed to Ben, who was looking at her with concern. "Ben," she cried out, "did you know? Did you know about this?" Ben looked at her, his expression tightening. He admitted that he always knew something was off about his family history, a secret his father, Mr. Harrison, had tried so hard to hide. Mr. Harrison was a wealthy, powerful man, but he always acted strangely when Ben asked about stories from the past. Ben didn't know the details, but he knew that his father had had a secret relationship that had left serious consequences. Ben had always felt there was a gap in his father's past, but he had never had the courage to investigate. Now that gap was filled with a horrifying truth. Elara felt betrayed. By her father, by her deceased mother, and by the husband she loved. She had been deceived her whole life, had become a pawn in a brutal game she never knew existed. A sense of hopelessness, despair, and fear engulfed her. And then, she remembered the trembling voice on the tape, Eleanor's warning, "The little girl won't be safe." Those words were not from the past. They were for the present. The sender of the mysterious photos, that powerful and dangerous man, had perhaps returned. And he might be looking for Elara. The four walls of Elara's bedroom had never felt so suffocating. It was once her sanctuary, a haven of safety and sweet dreams, but now it was just a cage built of lies. She couldn't look at Ben. The man she had loved and trusted was now just a painful reminder of everything she had lost. The silence between them grew heavy, and no words could explain the betrayal. Not from him, but from the cruel hand of fate that had connected them. Elara knew she couldn't live with this truth. She knew she couldn't live with the secret. The photos, the tape, and her father's confession had unleashed something inside her, a fury she never knew she possessed. It wasn't a volatile rage but a deadly calm, a cold determination to find the final truth. She had already paid too high a price, losing her innocence and her peace of mind. Now, she wouldn't give up until she knew what had happened to Eleanor. Ben, distraught and confused, tried to reach her. He told her that he, too, was a victim of his father's lies, that he hadn't known any of this. But Elara didn't listen. She had lost her trust in everyone. She knew only one thing. That man, Mr. Harrison, Ben's father, was the key. He had caused all of this. He knew where Eleanor was, and he knew what had happened after that final scream on the cassette tape. Elara's search led her to an old mansion on the outskirts of the city, where Mr. Harrison lived. As she stood before the massive iron gate, she felt a profound sense of fear. A powerful man living in a luxurious house, while her mother, that fragile woman, had disappeared without a trace. The confrontation between them wasn't filled with shouting or tears, but with a tense silence. Elara didn't make accusations. She simply placed the photos on the table, facing him, and demanded an explanation. Mr. Harrison said nothing. He just looked at the photos, his eyes revealing a deep sorrow and a regret he had buried for decades. Finally, he began to speak. "Eleanor was a free spirit," he said, his voice heavy with sadness. "She was unlike anyone I had ever known. I loved her, but I had a family and a career. I couldn't give it all up." He confessed that he had tried to hide the relationship, but when he learned Eleanor was pregnant, he was terrified. He tried to convince her to get an abortion, but Eleanor refused. She had run away, leaving everything behind so she could keep her child. Elara didn't believe him. She knew something wasn't right. The cassette tape told a different story. Her father's confession told a different story. Mr. Harrison had done something much more terrible. As Elara pressed him, tears streamed down his cheeks, and he spoke the truth. He had used his power and money to separate Eleanor and her child. He hired someone to take Elara away and staged a car accident, forcing Eleanor to abandon her daughter. He did it all to keep his secret, to protect his career and reputation. But he never anticipated that Eleanor would just vanish. She had disappeared, and no one had ever found her. The truth was finally exposed. Elara's pain was no longer that of a betrayed daughter, but the pain of a person who had been stripped of a life, a family, a mother. She had found the truth, but the truth brought her no peace. It only brought suffering. She didn't want to live in a world full of lies and secrets. She decided to leave her home, Ben, and everything she had ever known. Ben begged her to stay, saying he would do anything to fix everything. But she knew nothing could be fixed. The wound was too deep. She could only heal herself by living a new life, a life without lies. In the end, Elara found a small house in a seaside town, where she started over. She was still a teacher, but now, she taught her students about the importance of truth and honesty. She never forgot her past, never forgot the people who had loved and hidden her. She had accepted that Eleanor was gone, and she would never find her birth mother. But she lived an authentic life, a life without lies, and that was the greatest respect she could pay to her mother, Eleanor. And as night fell, she stood at her window, looking out at the vast ocean. She knew that she had found the peace she had been searching for all along. So there you have it. The secrets of the past, when exposed, can destroy everything you believe in. The story of Elara is a reminder that nothing is more important than the truth. If the story moved you, please leave a comment and let us know what you think. And don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next mysterious and fascinating stories. We'll see you in the next video.